February 5th, 2051. Fire crackles in the central square of Catania, Sicily, as a 25-year-old woman is dragged toward the flames. Her body is mutilated. Her breasts were brutally torn away with red-hot pincers just 2 days earlier, leaving open wounds that still bleed through the rags covering her chest. Her name is Agatha, and she refuses to break. For weeks of unimaginable torture, this extraordinary woman has defied the most powerful man in Sicily, rejected his advances, resisted his threats, and maintained her faith even as her own body was destroyed, piece by piece. In moments, the flames will consume her flesh, but her spirit has already become immortal. How did a young Christian woman manage to confront the absolute power of Rome and transform her death into an eternal symbol of feminine resistance? To understand Agatha's supernatural courage, we must return to 3rd century Sicily, when the island lived under the brutal yoke of the Roman Empire. Agatha was born in Catania around 225, into a prosperous Christian family that had secretly embraced the new faith brought by the disciples of St. Paul. She grew up in an era when being Christian meant living in hiding, when a single informant could destroy entire families. From childhood, Agatha demonstrated a religious devotion that impressed even the most fervent Christians in her community. At 15, she made a private vow of perpetual virginity, dedicating her body and soul entirely to Christ. In a society where women were property to be traded in arranged marriages, this decision was revolutionary and dangerous. But Agatha was not merely devout. She was extraordinarily beautiful. Contemporary chroniclers described her beauty as transcendent, with golden hair that gleamed like sunlight, deep blue eyes like the Sicilian Sea, and a face of almost angelic perfection. This beauty, combined with her family's wealth, made her one of the most desirable matches on the island. For years, Agatha managed to maintain her vow of chastity by discreetly rejecting the suitors her family presented. She claimed she was still too young, that she wanted to wait a few more years before marrying. Her parents, devout Christians, understood her true motivation and protected her as they could, but they knew it would eventually become impossible to hide her intentions. The situation changed dramatically in 250, when Quintianus was appointed praetor of Sicily by Emperor Decius. Quintianus was a brutal and ambitious man, known for his cruelty against Christians and his uncontrolled lust for young women. When he arrived in Catania and saw Agatha for the first time during a public festival, he became instantly obsessed. For Quintianus, Agatha represented everything he desired: incomparable beauty, substantial wealth, and the challenge of conquering a woman who seemed unreachable. He immediately began courting her with the arrogance of one who had never been rejected. He sent luxurious gifts, organized banquets in her honor, and made generous offers to her family. But Agatha rejected all his advances with a politeness that barely disguised her contempt. She claimed to have dedicated her life to God and had no interest in marriage with anyone, much less with a pagan who persecuted Christians. These rejections infuriated Quintianus, accustomed to having any woman he desired through power or force. Quintianus's obsession with Agatha quickly transformed into something sinister. He began investigating her family, searching for evidence of Christian activities he could use as leverage. It didn't take long to discover that Agatha's parents were practicing Christians and that she herself secretly participated in forbidden worship. In January of 2051, Quintianus got the opportunity he had been waiting for. Emperor Decius had decreed one of the most systematic persecutions against Christians, ordering all citizens to offer sacrifices to Roman gods under penalty of death. It was the perfect excuse to eliminate the obstacles between him and Agatha. Quintianus had Agatha's parents arrested on charges of Christian practices, When she ran to save them, she was also captured and taken to the Praetorian palace. There, Quintianus revealed his true intentions. He offered to free the entire family if Agatha agreed to marry him and renounce Christianity. Agatha's response was devastating in its simplicity. "I would rather die as a Christian than live as a pagan and wife to a tyrant." Her words echoed through the palace, making it clear that no threat or promise would make her change her mind. For a 3rd-century woman to openly defy a Roman praetor was an act of almost unbelievable courage. Quintianus, publicly humiliated before his officers, ordered Agatha taken to the palace dungeons. But before beginning the tortures, he tried a different strategy. He handed her over to the care of Aphrodisia, a madam who ran Catania's most luxurious brothel, with instructions to soften her through exposure to immorality. For a month, Agatha was kept in the brothel, where Aphrodisia tried every imaginable method to corrupt her. She offered luxuries, threatened violence, brought attractive young men to seduce her, and even used drugs to try to break her resistance. But Agatha remained immovable as stone, praying constantly and keeping her purity intact. The strategy failed completely. Aphrodisia, frustrated, reported to Quintianus that the young Christian was incorruptible by normal methods, and that only physical torture could break her will. The praetor, his obsession now mixed with hatred, decided that if he couldn't have Agatha, he would ensure no one else could either. February 4th, 2051. Agatha was brought back to the Praetorian palace to face a tribunal that was mere formality. Quintianus, dressed in all the pomp of his Roman authority, offered her one last chance to save her life, sacrifice to the Roman gods, and accept his marriage proposal. Agatha's response was even more defiant than before. "My body belongs to Christ, my soul belongs to God, and I would rather give my life to martyrdom than to the dishonor of uniting myself with a man like you." Her words sealed her fate, but also guaranteed her immortality. The torture that followed was designed to be both physical and psychological. Quintianus wanted to break not just Agatha's body, but her spirit, her faith, and her identity as a woman. He ordered her stripped publicly and placed on a torture rack, where her limbs were stretched nearly to breaking. For hours, Agatha was subjected to tortures that made experienced soldiers turn away. Red-hot irons were applied to her back, nails were inserted under her fingernails, and lead-weighted whips tore her skin to the bone. But with each new agony, she cried out not in pain, but words of faith. "Christ gives me strength. Christ protects me." Seeing that conventional tortures weren't breaking her spirit, Quintianus ordered something that shocked even his own soldiers. He commanded that incandescent pincers be used to tear away Agatha's breasts, a mutilation specifically targeting her femininity and designed to destroy not just her body, but her identity as a woman. The mutilation was performed slowly, with Quintianus watching every moment of agony in hopes of finally seeing Agatha break. The red-hot pincers gripped her flesh, the nauseating smell of burning meat filled the air, and screams echoed through the palace. But even in this supreme moment of horror, Agatha did not renounce her faith. As her blood spread across the marble palace floor, Agatha found strength to speak one last time. "Cruel tyrant, are you not ashamed to mutilate in a woman what you yourself sucked from your mother? But my soul has intact breasts, with which I nourish all my sacred feelings." These words, preserved by Christian chroniclers, became one of the most powerful declarations of feminine resistance in ancient history. Even mutilated and dying, Agatha had managed to transform her agony into spiritual victory, her humiliation into moral triumph. Quintianus, realizing he had created a martyr instead of breaking a rebel, ordered Agatha returned to the dungeon to die slowly from her wounds. But during the night, something extraordinary happened that Christians interpreted as divine miracle. Saint Peter appeared in her cell, healed her wounds, and restored her mutilated breasts. When the guards found Agatha the next morning, completely healed and radiant with spiritual joy, panic spread through the palace. Soldiers whispered about divine intervention. Officers questioned the wisdom of persecuting someone clearly protected by the gods, and even Quintianus began to doubt his actions. But the praetor was far from finished. Enraged by what he saw as trickery or black magic, he ordered Agatha subjected to final torture. She would be burned alive on glowing coals. If the Christian gods had healed her, he would ensure there was no body left to heal. February 5th, 2051. Agatha was dragged to Catania's central square, where a crowd gathered to witness her execution. Burning coals were spread across the ground, creating an open-air furnace that would make the victim die slowly from terrible burns. But when Agatha was placed upon the incandescent coals, something inexplicable happened. The earth began to shake violently, buildings swayed on their foundations, and Quintianus's own palace cracked from top to bottom. A devastating earthquake struck Catania at the exact moment the martyr touched the flames. The pagans interpreted the earthquake as the god's wrath against Agatha's execution. Christians saw the hand of God protecting his faithful servant. Quintianus, terrified by the supernatural coincidence, ordered the execution stopped immediately. But it was too late. Agatha had inhaled toxic gases from the flames and died moments later, not from burns, but from asphyxiation. Her last words, whispered to the Christians who approached as she died, became her final prayer. Lord, just as you gave me grace to resist the tyrant's tortures, grant me now the grace to depart from this life to you. With these words, Agatha expired, transforming her death into definitive victory over her persecutors. Agatha's death had consequences Quintianus could never have predicted. Instead of discouraging Christians, her martyrdom inspired them to even fiercer resistance. Her story spread rapidly throughout the Roman Empire, becoming a symbol that not even the most brutal tortures could break true faith. Quintianus did not survive long to witness these consequences. A few months after Agatha's death, he was killed by his own soldiers during a military revolt. Christians interpreted his death as divine justice, celestial punishment for his atrocities against the Sicilian martyr. More importantly, Agatha's story became one of antiquity's most powerful examples of feminine resistance. In an era when women had few rights and less power, she had confronted the most powerful man in her region and emerged spiritually victorious, even while being physically defeated. The cult of Saint Agatha spread rapidly throughout the Christian world. Her relics were preserved and venerated. Her story was told and retold for generations, and she became patroness, not only of Catania, but of persecuted women everywhere. Her feast day, celebrated on February 5th, became one of the most important in the early Christian calendar. The city of Catania developed a special devotion to its local martyr. When Mount Etna threatened to destroy the city with a devastating eruption in 425, citizens carried St. Agatha's veil in procession to the volcano's slopes. Miraculously, the lava stopped before reaching the city, and Agatha also became patroness against natural disasters. During the Middle Ages, Agatha's story inspired countless women to resist oppression and maintain their dignity even in the most desperate circumstances. Her image, frequently portrayed carrying her own breasts on a platter, became a universal symbol of feminine sacrifice and resistance to abusive masculine power. Christian art preserved and amplified her story through paintings, sculptures, and mosaics that decorated churches throughout Europe. Artists like Andrea Mantegna, Francisco de Zurbarán, and Georges de la Tour created masterpieces that immortalized her suffering and glory, ensuring her story would never be forgotten. Today, More than 1700 years after her death, Saint Agatha remains one of early Christianity's most venerated figures. Her story has transcended religious boundaries to become a universal symbol of feminine resistance against oppression, sexual abuse, and authoritarian power. In our era, when issues of sexual harassment, abuse of power, and women's rights dominate public discourse, Agatha's story resonates with renewed force. She anticipated by 17 centuries many of the struggles women still face today, proving that the courage to say no to abusive power is eternal and universal. The woman who had her breasts cut off for defying power transformed her mutilation into a symbol of resistance, her death into spiritual victory, and her suffering into inspiration for millions. Saint Agatha of Sicily proved that some principles are more important than life itself, and that true victory can sometimes only be achieved through supreme sacrifice. Her story remains a powerful reminder that even in the darkest times, when power seems absolute and injustice invincible, there are always individuals willing to pay the ultimate price to keep alive the ideals of dignity, purity, and freedom that define our deepest humanity.